In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going into Exodus chapter 2. I'm going to read it in full, and then afterwards we're going to go through some deep biblical unlocks. But just a little summary. Exodus 2, this is the origin story of Israel's deliverer, who is Moses. And Moses, we're going to see, is born into oppression. He's going to be hidden and miraculously preserved by his mother, and then he's going to be adopted and discovered by someone in Egypt. So this is going to be important. And it's going to set the stage for the entire Exodus story, okay? So we're following Exodus 1. What we saw in Exodus 1, we saw a little bit of oppression there. We saw the fact that babies were being killed under Pharaoh's watch because Pharaoh was scared that the Israelite children would actually, like the baby boys would, when they grow to be adults, they would be abettors and they would be allies of Egypt's enemies and overthrow the Egyptian authorities. So that is the context of this particular chapter. Okay, so let's read and let's see what's going to go down. Verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it, and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, "I drew him out of the water." Verse 11. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and he said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" He answered, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. So Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come back so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian has helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." He said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to share a meal." Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son, and he named him Gershom. For he said, "I have been an alien residing in a foreign land." After a long time the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Their cry for help rose up to God from their slavery. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. Alright, so let's go through some deep biblical unlocks that we can identify in this particular chapter. Verses 1 to 10, we saw a Levite woman who hid her son for 3 months, placed him in a basket on the Nile, and then later he is found by Pharaoh's daughter. And Miriam watches and arranges his nurse, his mother. So Moses is actually raised by both Hebrew and Egyptian. So the Hebrew is the nurse and the Egyptian is Pharaoh's daughter. It's important to recognize what's the meaning of this, or the significance of this. God continues to preserve his covenant seed even through risky faith and unexpected acts of kindness, which would inevitably shape the history of the biblical story, because this is a really important moment in the biblical story. We even read in Hebrews 11:23 that by faith Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after his birth, because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And we also see this in Acts chapter 7 verse 20 to 21. At this time Moses was born, and he was beautiful before God. For 3 months he was brought up in his father's house, and when he was abandoned, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. So this is important because it's going to form the basis of what's going to come later on. In verses 11 to 15, Moses kills an Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew. So Moses is a murderer. Let's make no mistake about it. He killed someone else. Then, when he realizes that people know of what he's done, he flees to Midian. Okay? So something that's really important here is God does not approve of murder, obviously. But compassion can actually produce rash violence when it's mixed with impatience. So for example, Moses was impatient. He came to kill the Egyptian who was beating a Hebrew because he felt for the Hebrew. But justice and vengeance is ultimately God's and belongs to God. And this is something that illustrates Moses's lack of maturity when it comes to his leadership skills, right? And this is something he's going to learn as he continues to go along. He must learn patience in God's timing in order to adequately continue along with God's promise, God's plan, and his divine providence, as we will see later on. Another thing here, though, in Acts chapter 7 verse 22 to 29 we read, "So Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in his words and deeds. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his kinsfolk, the Israelites. When he saw one of them being wrong, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his kinfolk would understand that God through him was rescuing them, but they did not understand. The next day he came to some of them as they were quarreling and tried to reconcile them, saying, 'Men, you are brothers, why do you wrong each other?' But the man who was wronging his neighbor pushed Moses aside, saying, 'Who made you a ruler and a judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptians yesterday?' When he heard this, Moses fled and became a resident alien in the land of Midian. There he became the father of 2 sons. So, in this particular chapter, I'm pretty sure Stephen, the Saint Stephen, who was later beat with a bunch of rocks, is actually recounting the entire story of the Bible, the Hebrew Scriptures, and he's making mention of this particular passage because this is really important. Exodus chapter 2. Okay, very important. Then in verses 16 to 22, Moses defends Ruel, Jethro's daughters, at a well. He's welcomed by them, and he marries Zipporah and has a son named Geshrom, which means I have been a stranger there, and he lives in Midian for a season. So Midian actually is going to be the place where Moses is going to gain humility. He's going to shepherd. He's going to have he's going to learn hospitality, and he's going to learn, and he's going to prepare himself for God's call, which is going to come in the next chapter. It's really important because Moses defends Ruel and Jethro's daughters. he is allowed to stay in Midian for a while. And this is something that's really important. The little actions that you do can have significant consequences, and sometimes God will put you in places where you're able to learn and grow so that you are better prepared for his ultimate calling. Again, really important stuff here. And then finally, in verses 23 to 25, we read, the Israelites are going to groan under bondage, right? So they cry out, and God remembers his covenant. God remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He sees their affliction and knows. So when God remembers something, it's actually a prelude to his action. And the same covenant promises that were made in Genesis are going to be activated and fulfilled in this way. It's really important because sometimes people think that praying is not really useful, right? But all throughout the Bible, what do we see? God hears your prayers. When people cry out, God remembers your prayers. We remember, and we can even see this in Revelation, the prayers of the saints come up from heaven, and God, in the final days, in the final judgment, has a specific time where he will hear all the prayers of those who are on earth. And when he hears those prayers, he takes decisive action. And it's critical for us to understand this, because we can obviously get into the habit of saying, you know what, there's no point in praying, no one's hearing, I'm speaking to deaf ears. But that couldn't be further from the truth. I just want to read what God actually said to Abram. This is before he was named Abraham. The Lord said to Abram, know this for certain, that your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. This is Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 to 14, a prophecy of what is to come in Exodus. And obviously we're going to read in Exodus chapter 3, we're going to see God actually speaking to Moses. It's going to be a very important chapter in the Bible. But again, in Psalm chapter 105, verse 37, we read that, then he brought Israel out with silver and gold, and there was no one among their tribes who stumbled. Okay, very nice. Let's go through some applications that we can apply in our own lives, based on the basis of the information that we've learned in this particular chapter. It's really important to recognize and celebrate small faithfulness around us that actually ends up preserving life and continuing the biblical narrative. Now, what does that mean? There are going to be Miriams around us who are ordinary people who have faithfulness and will defend and protect life. And people don't necessarily understand the level of importance that your little actions have in the grand scheme of God's plan. Imagine you're just seeing a baby in a basket going down the Nile River, I think it was. And if you see a little baby going down the Nile River, I'm sure Miriam and I'm sure Pharaoh's daughter would not have even began to fathom the impact that this child would have in what's to come, right? In protecting and preserving the Israelites, in following God's plan, in shepherding and protecting Israel's covenant journey. Imagine if they just looked away, because a lot of baby boys were being thrown into the Nile, according to the edict of Pharaoh. But they were different in this case, and that should be something we pay attention to, because the fact that they protected this child would have immense ramifications for the covenant journey. I also wanted to point out something which is important, is that you need to embrace seasons of exile. So in the same way that Moses was exiled essentially to Midian, right, because he was afraid of Pharaoh, that he was going to hunt him down and kill him because he had killed the Egyptian, you have to be thinking to yourself, okay, what seasons do I have? What Midian season is there where I'm being trained for future service? There are going to be times where you're not actually doing things which you see as adequately pointing and really visible steps in God's purpose for you, your plan, but rather it's preparation for the plan as opposed to being the plan itself. Because there's certain things that you need to learn, there's certain lessons that you need to encounter, there's certain people that you need to meet, there's certain skills that you need to acquire, there's certain values that you need to develop. And there are going to be seasons where, like Moses in Midian, you are going to be in a place where you need to learn humility, you need to learn stewardship, you need to be able to listen. And there are some actionable steps that you can do during these times, yeah? Like you could learn a small weekly habit and develop it. You can be more mindful in your relationships. You could pray a lot more. Things like this is going to be really important, especially considering it's building you up for your actual purpose, God's plan, and stuff like that. So that's going to be really important as well. Okay, I just wanted to just point out some of the key things to remember from this particular chapter. God often preserves people through fragile and risky means, right? Think about it. All of Israel depends on Moses, essentially, and that's what we're going to read throughout Exodus. And he puts the baby on a frail, flimsy basket, and it just so happens that a mother's faith and a watching sister are all present in this little region. And it's important to remember that God preserves those whom he loves and are called to, according to his greater purposes. Remember in Romans chapter 8 verse 28, all things work for good for those who love God and are called according to his purposes. So Moses was never in trouble because God was always going to be looking after him. And God remembers the covenant, especially considering the cries, when he hears the cries of those who call out to him, the cries, the prayers of the saints. So ordinary people and ordinary acts can have great consequences in God's divinely instituted plan. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.